Terminator 2 is a good one for me, and I realize that's 1991. That's cheating a little bit, but
Terminator came out in the 80s.
1980s now.
Hey, welcome back to another episode of 1980s Now, a weekly examination of the importance of 1980s pop culture and its continued influence today. My name is Will, and joining me today is a panel of esteemed psychologists who have different specialties within their field, but also love pop culture as much as I do, and many of them use it in their practices. They are going to help me explore, understand the role of pop culture, if any, in our current, let's say, political climate, or more broadly stated, the role of pop culture when you're dealing with anything heavy, difficult, challenging in your real life. Does it play any role? I don't know. But these guys know. I put links to all their various social media in the comments below. Please welcome to the show Ben Taitz, Colt and Travis Langley. Thanks, guys, for joining me today.
Absolutely.
Thanks for having us.
So here's the deal. Look, I'm going to just be honest with you here. My guy did not win the election in November, which was, upsetting to me. Obviously half of the country roughly was going to be, feel down regardless of the outcome. My half lost, so it was my turn to feel that way. And it was concerning, but it wasn't as concerning as once this gentleman, or I use that term very loosely, trying to be semi-polite here, it took office. And what has been happening now in the last few weeks throughout the month of January and into February is quite alarming. And I do this podcast where we chat about the 1980s pop culture and try to tie it to something going on today. I didn't feel like that was even something I should continue doing because it seems so frivolous in the light of the important things that are happening in the world. Maybe I should be doing a show about something else, or maybe just not do it at all. And so I want to talk to you, you guys coming from the different backgrounds that you do with regard to this. I suppose my first question is whether or not it's appropriate to enjoy pop culture when maybe our attentions should be elsewhere.
I think that makes it even more important. I had this conversation with my friend Michael Uslan, producer of the Batman movies, for those who don't know who he is, and they think I'm just dropping names to be dropping names, but he is one of my very good friends. And we've had this conversation before about when things are very difficult and dark times, and how sometimes it feels frivolous to be doing the fiction, or frivolous to be promoting what you've done. But there are some people need an escape, something to take a break from the horrible things in the moment. And even beyond that, though, most of the fiction, one way or another, is going to help you feel, is going to help you think. It may help you not sit there numbly or afraid. Or if you have your fear and you can't just ignore it, maybe you can be afraid for somebody else through that fiction. You can exercise these feelings and maybe exorcise them to some degree too. It may take spelling and thought bubbles for that to work. I've said so many times what we do, we go through this filter of fiction, which I'll mention again later, this filter of fiction to look at reality, because reality can be so hard. I can talk about some of the worst things in the world through the fictional example, and people will stay with me. When I teach forensic psychology, and I'm talking about some brutal things such as families that have been killed, that's a hard topic. I can talk about the same things we've learned about real people, but while speculating, how would that have affected Bruce Wayne? How would that have affected Matt Murdock? And people will stay with me thinking about these things while to sympathize with the fictional characters, and they're still thinking about the difficult topic they might not have let themselves think about when looking straight at harsh, brutal reality.
I think it's completely appropriate. I think that on a number of different levels, it's really important to have these outlets to be able to still enjoy life. But I also think that a lot of the pop culture that we end up consuming is allegorical. I mean, it really does address a lot of what we're going through right now. And I think that that's the best pop culture we can consume. the stuff that you can view on two different levels. You can enjoy it. There's action. It's funny, but it also speaks to what's going on, or it's prophetic in that it warns us about what might be coming. So I think there's a lot of really good reasons to still be doing what you're doing and to be able to weave this all together, because for a lot of people, they're not going to seek out purely political commentary. They're not going to seek out media that's going to talk about what's specifically going on, but they are going to view this stuff that they enjoy. So if we can spark some of that in people and get them talking, I think it's great. So podcasts like this, keep them up.
Yeah, I agree. Honestly, I think that even when times feel so like tense and chaotic and dark, that's actually when it's more needed to engage with whatever pop culture interests you have, whether it be, you know, movies, TV shows, superheroes, comics, anime, whatever. That's when it's more needed. I don't know if that's proper grammar. I'm really bad at grammar. But, you know, it's not just, you know, a distraction. It is a form of self-care. It is a way for you to center yourself in an environment that you know, that you understand, and that you can feel comforted in, and also still recognize that, you know, you do still have the real world around you. We don't always have to, you know, drown in the realities of life just because it's there. We can take our attention away for a short period of time, because otherwise, if we're only ever engaging with political discourse, then let's just say that probably Colt and I will be a lot busier professionally, because there'll be a lot more mental health issues if you're only ever focusing on political discourse. We need the distractions. We need the things that are fun and exciting, whether they are allegorical or not. It's still something for us. It's for you. It speaks to you in your language. And that's what is important.
I also think you get flooded by these things too, and you get desensitized. So it's just like compassion fatigue. You have to take your time away. You have to take care of yourself so that you recognize the importance and the impact of what's going on as well.
Yeah.
So so I saw this, look, before we recorded, we were lamenting the ills of social media, but I'm about to say, I saw on TikTok this psychologist or psychiatrist, he was a therapist. I wish I could remember his name. Maybe you're familiar with him, but he was talking about how a lot of folks are discouraged from facing things that were traumatic because they say, it could be harmful to keep, but what he said is, no, the opposite is true. What you need to do is sort of continue to face it till you're sort of overloaded and desensitized to these experiences by processing it over and over again. I'm not in the field that you guys work, but I'm wondering how either pop culture may take us too far away from experiencing, is there a danger, I suppose, in avoiding all the maybe using it too much as a drug, let's say, for self-care?
Yeah, I can think back to a college buddy who he lost himself in World of Warcraft and didn't know what was going on in the world, didn't want to be bothered by it. And I think that that's way too far in the opposite direction. I think we can get lost and disconnected and less human, on the other side. I
think you use the word avoidance, and I definitely think that's the issue. Is we don't want to avoid things, because avoiding doesn't actually make it go away. It doesn't make things better. It actually just makes it harder for you to deal with when you do finally come face to face with it. I would, encourage instead, we can accept that, yes, it is nice to engage with our fandoms. And also we still have real lives that we have to live. We have responsibilities, we have obligations, and we are responsible for our choices. And then also we can flip that. Yes, the world sucks, and there's a lot that we do have to pay attention to. And we also can take time away from that. As long as we're doing that in a way that we acknowledge that we're not just like trying to avoid it forever and we're never going to deal with it. We're just acknowledging, yeah, things are bad, and I'm choosing at this time to do something good for me, versus, like Colt said, drowning and flooding with the negative stimuli. That's never good.
I think one of the hard parts for me too is I feel like I speak from a position of privilege when it comes to this, because there's a lot of bad stuff going on in the country right now. it doesn't impact me as much as it impacts a lot of my friends and people who I hold near and dear to my heart. So I also have to be mindful of the fact that when I step away and I lose myself in a new show or a movie or whatever it happens to be, not everybody can do that. Not everybody can step away. They can't afford to.
I think the issue is not about privilege or anything like that. You know, if you are choosing to get away in your shows, then that's your choice. And when you're talking to people about the potential benefits of getting lost in shows, you're not telling them what to do. You're not saying you have to do this in order to feel better, because you're right. Not everybody can do that given their life situations. You know, people are, you know, working multiple jobs, or just they don't have those kind of resources to allow themselves that. And so when we talk about using geek culture for self-care, I think it's really important to say, you know, this is something that you can do if you are able to. And there's so many different ways to engage with pop culture. It doesn't always have to be watching a show. It can be as simple as doodling, you know, the characters or whatever, or listening to a podcast while you're driving to work, you know, or anything like that. So when I talk to people about it, it's never like, oh, you know, this is the way to deal with it. It is a way. And unfortunately, yeah, not everybody is in a position where they can do it in that same way. But it's a very flexible thing. And I encourage people to find a way that works for them, given their limitations. Accept those limitations and find a way to work with them, so you can still enjoy the things that will bring you joy.
And this is where it becomes apparent that Ben's job is to help people get better and mine isn't.
Very good. Yeah. For folks who can't see you, you're agreeing, just, you know, coming at it at slightly different angles. So I don't think this is the inverse or, you know, of what we're talking about here necessarily, but, you know, thinking about how maybe it's, you could, using it as a form of self-care is, and I think Colt was sort of maybe intimating this earlier, this idea, can pop culture be used as a way, as a sort of immersion therapy, maybe, that some of the things that are happening in the world that are traumatic, upsetting, et cetera, by watching movies, TV shows that have fictional versions of this, that show the characters deal with it, maybe even address it and succeed, that can help us process these things that are bothering us in the real world.
That was a good use of the term immersion therapy.
Thank you.
I completely agree. Though I don't specialize in immersion therapy, it is something that I've talked about with clients that, like, to help you understand what's going on, let's talk about what we can understand. Like, the big world, the world outside is complex. It's really convoluted and it's hard to know what's going on. And so putting it in a different kind of context, such as what happens in, you know, a comic book or show, can help people to kind of figure out where the things line up. And it definitely can, you know, help people to build those skills of coping with the stresses of whatever's going on, by like easing them through whatever the journey is. And actually, I'm going to be doing a presentation with my brother and two friends in April for the Therapeutic and Applied Geek and Gaming Summit about using Agatha all along as a form, as to help with like exposure therapy and the grief and loss and everything, and the whole concept of the witch's road. So this is basically kind of like that, like, okay, in the show, they're going through these issues. And this is kind of like what it is in therapy, where we're going to go through these things to help you be able to handle whatever is bothering you.
I think it seems a little more, I mean, the film, the story, the TV show, when really well done, when it really grabs us, is immersive in that way. But it's not literally immersing you in the topic, the thing. So that kind of differs from immersive therapy or flooding in that way. To me, it's a little closer to systematic desensitization or covert sensitization. You know, since we're going in steps toward. It's Max Brooks offered one example when you asked why the zombie stories were so popular, and I've had to talk about this so many times. One day I did a radio book tour, 24 radio interviews in one day. And I was asked about and I've done this on several books, but on The Walking Dead psychology in particular, I was asked over and over why zombie stories were so popular. And I normally love this topic, but there was a point in the day, it's like, I can't answer this again. I've answered this. I just can't go. I don't want to go into that, just playing it from the jukebox. Fortunately, the next person did not ask. Then I had a lunch break and got to rethink before the next time. But to the actual question, why are these things kind of popular? As I always talk about, we use this filter of fiction to looking at reality through the fictional lens. And Max Brooks' comment that he made, he's done it more than once, but one particular, he was talking about in an interview and saying, with a real world topic, it's too blunt, too brutal, and you're not going to be able to sleep. You watch a zombie story where the outbreak is happening and the president's flying over, looking down at the world going, well, that's peculiar. And you can see satire in it. You can see humor in a horrible thing. And you are still able to sleep because you know it's not real. And some people get nightmares, but there's a lot of truth in what he said, is that additional step away from the real topic lets us look at some of the things we still want to look at, but in a safer feeling way. It can be more comfortable to some people right now watching the Kingpin running for mayor of New York than some people running for political office in real life. And yet it still lets them think about some of the same issues while setting aside some of the things that bother them about it.
You know what's interesting is I'm reminded how in the 1980s we had it seemed that we had a lot of TV shows and films that dealt with things we were terrified of. We had shows about nuclear apocalypse. We had shows about alien invasion, which was, going back obviously a couple decades, but seemed like it'd be peak in the 1980s, being abducted by aliens, being kidnapped by strangers. We had tons of stuff like that. I feel like it did scare me more. Like Day After. That's probably the first horror movie I remember scaring shit out of me. It was The Day After.
When I was in college, I didn't see it, but so many people on campus were talking about that thing.
Terrifying. But I remember feeling uncomfortable watching it in a way that's different today, seeing things. I remember during the first pandemic, I couldn't watch anything that was triggering at all because I just felt so fearful, generally speaking.
And yet, pandemic movies shot up in viewership immediately early on, just like after 9/11. The movies about planes getting hijacked shot up in viewership. It let people still get into some of these issues that were on their mind, that were in their feelings no matter what, but in a safer feeling way where also you knew that there was hope. The movie or story might not have the happy ending, but you watch it in hope that there will be, that you're watching it all says that hope exists, that this story could have the happy ending.
Yeah, it's offering that people that distance to explore these topics and these feelings, because if we're holding them too hard inside of us, it's really hard to kind of see that it's not all of our life like that. It's not our identity, because people can get overwhelmed by that. But if we can look at these topics through this distance of the movies or the shows, it gives a sense of control over the experience of the anxiety or whatever, because you have that distance.
Yeah, that sense of control is important too. You said that, and it made me think about it, because I don't usually get into that aspect, but like, you have the mute button in your hand. You have the pause button in your hand. You can rewind, you can skip. You do have some control over this thing that you think of it being, oh, you're just passively watching it. No, you still have some control right there with that magic wand.
Yeah.
But you said something about hope, I think, Travis, and you made that example of the new Daredevil show where we have this, it could be a stand-in for Trump. Let's just be, direct about it, I suppose. Maybe coincidence, probably not.
Well, it's not. It was inspired by a specific comic book storyline in which the Kingpin ran for and became mayor of New York, and that was inspired by the first Trump campaign.
Right, there you go. I find myself, and I am watching the show, but I would say during the first Trump presidency, and I haven't had this experience yet, I found it difficult to watch things that gave me hope in fictional ways. For example, West Wing. which I think was on during maybe entirely, Bush #2's presidency. There was something where it still seemed like that reality could exist, and then we got to Obama and it seemed closer to that sort of fictional reality of having this, president. Now, the way the things are, now I'm really taking us down a dark path, I feel like, but the way the government is sort of the direction it's moving, which seems like possibly, am I getting, hair on fire, autocracy here? It seems less like we're going to have a daredevil save us, or a President Bartlett in the future.
You're afraid to hope. You're afraid to hope because you're afraid to be disappointed.
It's kind of like a fear of rejection almost, where, you're afraid to talk to somebody that you like and tell them how you feel because you don't want that rejection that may or may not happen. So I will also say that, I loved The West Wing. It was one of my favorite political dramas and everything like that. I think they did such a good job of showing the kind of it wasn't overly dramatized. It wasn't overly romanticized, and it wasn't overly dark in whenever they were talking about those different things. Whereas, unfortunately, what happens now with a lot of political discourse and a lot of media is they're focusing a lot on all the bad, and people are not getting full context. They're not getting full understanding of everything else that's going on because we only get, short clips, we get short bits, and there's just so much of it that it gets it feels like there is no positive. And it's not just with this current presidency. This is with every presidency. It's in the modern day, news media has focused more and more on the problems that are going on and not on what's going well. And that's why the pop culture can play such a big role, is because it can show that there's a possibility of good things happening. But in the, in the mainstream media, if it bleeds, it leads.
And if it bleeds, we can kill it. So to your point then, can pop culture provide role models, provide inspiration? I'm thinking again, I'm trying to bring this back to the 80s because generally that's what we talk about. Red Dawn, look, even Mad Max, we had nuclear Holocaust films, and I was hopeful I could drive a super cool car after the world was over and, have a shotgun and a dog that was, one of those. Can today we have examples in pop culture that could show us how to combat, and I mean it metaphorically, maybe not literally, hopefully, and certainly in a war sense, these things that, seem to be on the rise, let's say.
Well, even less directly, the heroic example, the hopeful example in fiction, reading it, watching it, exercises the parts of the brain that feel more heroic, that feel more hopeful. It is in parts of the brain, imagination is activation. It's like when you're involved in the fiction, it's being there with the character you can hope for is still helping keep your hope neurons from atrophying.
Wow.
We can look at some of these characters and see a positive role model. We can see a future that is going to be one of hope. We can look at how people have overcome things. And this doesn't specifically relate to politics, but an example I like to give is the day before I went in for very major surgery, got cut open, wasn't sure if I was going to wake up. I watched the episode Tapestry of Star Trek: The Next Generation. Like all of the scars that we have, every injury, like all of these things can have a positive outcome. And looking at the struggles that we're going through now, we can see good role models. We can look at Red Dawn. We can see that resistance, and we can look at a future that we can get on the other side of. So I think that that's a piece of hope that really media can bring to us.
They also give us a language to talk to people who know the fiction and can think about some of these issues with the fictional character, who might then, they've got a big resistance to it, cognitive dissonances and a lot of other things keeping them from realizing where they've been hypocritical. But some people can see, it's like, oh yeah, that is, there are people who are, they're having to be reminded, you're rooted for the rebels in Star Wars and Firefly and on through the list, and yet you learned the wrong lesson. But some people will get it. It may take something big. It may take It may help them when they finally see that, oh, that person is wearing the mask. That person is lying to us. It's hard. It's very hard. People double down, quintuple down, especially the more publicly they've expressed these opinions. But they may also have publicly expressed opinions about some of that fiction. So you can engage them in dialogue about the fiction that may help. See, as like ministers use stories when preaching sermons to make a point. It's, you want to go ancient, you've got, book of Jesus using parables to make his point. And then of course we're telling the story about that story. Right. And these help us think, these help us feel. And it's when we're going for the 80s was a time, when we're getting a lot of anti-heroes arising in fiction because of people looking at a world when they're having trouble seeing what can solve the problems of that time. And so the fiction reflected what was going on, but also helped inspire people, help them see some of the problems in the fictional stories, help them see why they think about why they didn't necessarily want vigilantes on the subway.
Yeah, thinking about that as an example, you're right. And it's interesting to me, and again, it's just only something I realized sort of later as an adult, that, how much of our pop culture was influenced by the Reagan administration during the 1980s. Him saying that what was the 9 most terrifying words, I'm from the government and I'm here to help, or something like that, that you get these extra governmental heroes, A-Team, Ghostbusters, Knight Rider, that served as both a reflection of the policies of the day, but also heroes for us. I don't know what that would be today, and you could have most of the audience rooting for the good guys, to your point about maybe ultimately some of these folks will realize, but you have people today that co-opted the symbol of the Punisher, not realizing that he's fighting the bad guys.
And the second episode of Punisher, I think of Daredevil Born Again, I think hit on that. One of the cops, I think it showed a Punisher tattoo on his wrist. And so I think they'll get into this, which Jerry Conway, the Punisher's creator, and the character himself in the comics, and the character is telling some of the cops that's like, you should not be carrying my symbol. That's because, this symbolizes the failure of the police force. And I think Daredevil Born Again is going to be getting it, just showing that what looked like a Punisher tattoo on the cop's wrist. I think they're going to hit that one.
Frank wouldn't like any of the people who carry that symbol around.
Right. He does not feel he should be revered. Because he knows he reflects the failure of the system.
Well, and I think that's actually a really interesting point is we see these heroes that are dark and more nitty gritty. And people tend to admire them because they're doing what was necessary. And I feel like a lot of those kind of heroes, they didn't choose, like they didn't say, okay, I want to do this. They were kind of brought in by circumstances. And if you only ever look at what the hero is doing out of necessity without understanding the whole context and figuring out what went wrong that necessitated this hero to be there, then you're actually not solving any problems. One thing that I with regards to, like, let's say Star Wars and everything, people love the Rebel Alliance and the Resistance and everything. But if you're only supporting because they're against something and not what they're for, if you're only thinking about it as against the Empire, then you're not understanding what went wrong. Why did the Republic fail? And you see that they showed it in the Legends novels long before the current Disney sequels came out. But I feel like this current sequels really showed it really well, is that the New Republic failed because they weren't learning the lessons from before. They didn't understand, why did they even have to fight as a rebellion? Why did the Empire come about? Because you weren't doing the things that were supposed to be done. You weren't handling things properly. You were letting too many things go, whatever the corruption, whatever the issues. But if you don't learn those lessons, then, as we see in the current sequels, the Empire basically just comes back in another form. And so it's not just enough to support the heroes, we also have to understand, why do the heroes have to be there in the first place? And how can we learn from those lessons? And I think shows offer us the chance to learn more about our own circumstances, our own environments that we live in, political discourse and political realities. Not everybody knows the realities of what goes on in government and what the rules are and what you can and cannot do, and most people don't even know who the representatives are. And so you have to okay, it's nice to have a hero, but why is the hero necessary? We have to understand the whole context, so we then can find our voice in it too.
And it really goes back to that subtle commentary that I was talking about earlier. We enjoy these shows because they're fun, but they also have that message. And it's really interesting looking back at the sequels, which I'm not necessarily the biggest fan of, especially when you compare them to the originals. I don't think that's a controversial take. But look at what happened in 2020. We voted against somebody who we felt was a huge damage to our country. And then we didn't take that threat seriously ever again. And now 2024 rolls around and we're right back in that same page. It's the exact same thing that the New Republic did. They had this threat. They thought they had taken care of it because they took power, and then they just forgot about it.
They swore in members of Congress who had supported the insurrection, despite an amendment to the Constitution that said they did not have to swear those people in.
Yeah.
That might have been the last moment when they could have prevented what's happening right now. Might have been. We would go looking at these stories. We've got this negativity bias, this tendency to look at the negative in anything and have that stand as, some of our danger assessment systems, where while you're alert to that wolf in the dark and where the rest of everything else is nice, that wolf is still the threat. So it can be stupid little things where it's like, oh, why does this one thing have to carry more weight? But it does. Yeah. In Watchmen and The Dark Knight, and Frank Miller's Daredevil storyline. These stories in the 80s, what a lot of people, and Alan Moore and Frank Miller, who wrote those stories I'm talking about, they both commented on how so many people learned the wrong lesson because they both were ending the story with trying to be hopeful. And people forget that they were doing that in both cases. In both cases, they were trying to show problems with looking at the worst, problems with looking at just the darkest part, and the problems in forgetting to try to have hope.
Darkness, is all around us, but we always have the ability to find light. And once there's light, then it changes the whole perspective. And it is really important, even now, especially now, that, when things seem so chaotic, that we need to find something hopeful. We need to have the light. We need to see that there is still good in the world, even if it's on a smaller scale, and I don't know if they still do it as much because I don't watch a lot of news on TV anymore. But I remember when I was younger, and I was not alive in the 80s, so tell me if this happened in the 80s too. But there's always some segment of the news where it's and this local, zoo, something nice happened, or, they always had something nice going on, So I feel like that was something that we're missing, that even if it's something small, it's still good in the world.
We need Fred Rogers.
Yes.
Mr. Rogers, who says when all the worst things are happening, pay attention and look for the people who are helping.
So it seems like this creates based on, sort of synthesizing what we've been talking about here. It seems like this provides I believe in the power of pop culture, but it seems like it also provides a really interesting opportunity for Hollywood to create stories that, again, have us navigate some of these things emotionally, but also show us a way out that is hopeful. But I guess, look, I think I'm the most cynical among all of us to say that, is there money to be made in telling those stories? Or maybe there's a subversive way, like with the new Daredevil, or with Andor. Colt made me think of Andor season 2 coming out that showed us how we got to the rebellion. Will we see these stories?
I would like to believe that we will. You still see them now. They're just not as talked about as much. But if we can, bring those to light and show these hopeful stories, but also the stories that, even if it's talking about an emotionally tough subject, offer that context, offer that explanation. And, right now, unfortunately, what happens a lot with media is there's a kind of the narrative that, like, okay, we have to like only have all these horrible things happen because we like the underdog story or whatever. We need to also expand on stuff. If we're going to tell a story that has something negative, we need to understand where that negativity comes from and how it relates to the positive. They are, in an eternal dance.
You look at the most profitable movies ever made. I'm talking gross since they all manage it, so technically they don't net profit for whatever reason.
Right.
They're mostly heroic stories, one after another. They're hopeful stories. Some of them can be dark. Avengers Infinity War ends on a dark note and still has something to give you a sense of hope at the end, even if you don't know what it is. So Captain Marvel shows up, and it's like, even though you don't know what that has to do with anything, and she is there to just say, hey, there is some kind of hope, and then, but the end game. It depends on how you figure the numbers as to whether it or Force Awakens is number one in terms of gross adjusted for inflation. Endgame made more money than Infinity War, and also retroactively made Infinity War more fun to watch. Them saying this: no matter what we do, no matter how it gets, we can all fall. Where Cap's the only one left, the one without real superpowers, although he is an enhanced human, is. The only one left standing, because he will keep getting back up, to where even he's tired of hearing it from himself. In that movie, it's his shield is broken. Everybody else is fallen, and then there's a sound. He is surrounded by an army, and we still know Cap's not going to give up.
I just got goosebumps just remembering that.
Yeah,
Travis. Yeah, on your left. Oh boy,
that was beautiful.
Terminator 2 is a good one for me, and I realize that's 1991. That's cheating a little bit, but
Terminator came out in the 80s.
I know we've got the original, but I'm going to forget any other Terminator movie exists aside from those two. But we have this great story that warns us about the dangers of technology, artificial intelligence. There's this apocalypse that's going to happen, and the ending isn't necessarily a super happy one for Terminator 2. Your favorite character's dead. You've got some people on the run. There's a lot of uncertainty, but that is still an improvement over the future that they were showing, the inevitability of the apocalypse. Now, fate is what you make of it. That's hope. That's at least something. That's something to hold on to. And I feel like that is just such a great example of how we can weave these messages in, get people to think about what's going on without hitting them in the face with it. It's subversive still. And I think that that's really what we need to do.
It reminds me of something, when I talk with clients who, they're like, I just want to be how I was before whatever trauma, before whatever period of depression, before the stressors. And the unfortunate reality is not always can we get to that before, because we are not the same person as we were. However, can we do better than what we currently are? Like right now, we're struggling. So as long as we're still better than the struggle, that's still growth. That's still progress. It's still hope. And having that understanding that maybe we're not going to be exactly like we were. However, we can still be something good. And that's what I saw with the, OG Star Wars trilogy was, they're not better than they're not exactly where they were pre-Empire. Granted, at the end of the original trilogy, you didn't know about the Republic too much because we didn't have the prequels. But after the prequels came out, and we know about it now, but they're still better than the darkness. If there's still just one candle lit, that's still something more than we had before. So I will take that one candle over the darkness.
It's something I tell to the patients that I mentor. So I mentor stomach cancer patients. I'm a stomach cancer survivor. And one of the biggest concerns people have is, am I going to be the same person I was? Am I going to get to the same place I was before cancer? And I got to be honest with people, like, no, you're not going to be the same person. You're going to be something completely different. You're going to be resilient. You're going to be something completely different and beautiful, and that's okay.
But that's life.
Exactly.
Yeah. At 40, you might wish you could get back to what you were at 20. You can't and shouldn't, because that would also involve losing whatever lessons you'd learn.
Mm-hmm. That's the thing is, I talk to people like, do you think that the person you were before would have been able to handle this the way that you are now? And almost all of my clients will say, no, the person I was before, was silly, was not thinking about things, exactly. So you know what? We can't be that same person again. And we don't want to. We want to be a new person.
There's the term post-traumatic growth that I'm still surprised by how many people don't know this term, because we talk about it all the time.
Yeah.
And it is surprising to me how many people tell me they learned about it from one of the books that we worked on, that they had not heard of post-traumatic growth before. So in terms of us, I feel like we talk about it too much maybe, but it is
all the more reason why pop culture is useful.
Yes, because you can easily say, okay, Tony Stark, selfish SOB, immature man boy, even though he is a super genius. And then he goes through a horrible, traumatic experience that makes him reconsider his life and find purpose and grow as a person. He has gone through this, and it's, the person who has gone through trauma, they may have had full PTSD. They may not have had full PTSD, but they probably still have the symptom of reliving it more than other people. John Walsh, whose son Adam was brutally murdered, and somebody like him, he would not give up his pain. He clings to it and uses it to motivate himself to help keep others from going through what he went through, as he advocates for missing children, hosted America's Most Wanted, which started in the 80s in one form.
Yeah.
My gosh, we keep tying it back to the 80s. And but these people, the people, you take your pain. Star Trek 5.
Yes. Right.
Okay. Star Trek 5, which, okay, not the best movie, as with the first 9 movies, they said, it's the even number Star Treks that don't suck. But one thing in there later, it's when Sybok is offering to take Kirk's pain away, and Kirk says, "Our pain makes us who we are." And I thought that was just a wonderful point. I wish it had been in a better movie, but that movie has its point. It's too many. It's a too many cooks kind of mess. But it's like it is just a wonderful point. These things do make us who we are. You have to have the stresses to build the muscles. You have the injury that then maybe helps you build a stronger bone, or just be messed up. But all these things are so important. My wife and I were talking about this friend recently, that there's some things that made us increasingly conscious about how he's the same age as us, and he's never had any hardships. He's a wonderful person, a good person, good caring person. But there are things that he just lacks perspective on, because it's very fortunate for him. He hasn't had hardships in life, but he hasn't. And so there are ways in which he's not fully a grown-up. Where his own daughter, when she was 7 or 8, said to him, "Dad, you're just a big kid." Well,
and I'm just learning about post-traumatic growth from you guys here. I had never familiar with that phrase. Certainly, I guess I'm familiar with the phrase only from life experience of having changed through bad things. But I guess I'm realizing now, and to tie it back to pop culture, is the role that pop culture's played in that. So many of the philosophies, even just in the form of a quote, that have kept me going, because like the quote that Travis just pointed out from Star Trek, not that one specifically, but so many movies, even music lines have, during my darkest times, provided inspiration and just get me by a little bit longer, to hang on a little bit longer. And
yes,
I would say thanks to this conversation that we've had today, I certainly feel more hopeful and certainly understand better the role that pop culture plays in that. So I want to thank all you guys for your time today.
Absolutely.
Thanks
Thank
for
you.
having us.
There are links to the various social media and or websites of these gentlemen in the show notes. Meanwhile, though, is there anything that you guys are working on right now or coming up that we should be mindful of?
So I am now the director of outreach for a new nonprofit called Psychology for Geeks, where we try to blend mental health and geek culture to help improve self-care and just encourage discussion about mental health. We will be having a booth at Anime Las Vegas the weekend of March 28th. And I will be representing the nonprofit at WonderCon, also weekend of March 28th. I will be on a couple of panels there. And so for any listeners who will be at either Anime Las Vegas or WonderCon, come say hi to either myself or our president, Elizabeth Sanchez-Arvizu.
Very good. Colt, got something?
I've got nothing professional to plug, but I will say I'm on the board of directors for a nonprofit called Debbie's Dream Foundation. It's a stomach cancer organization. And if you know anybody who's affected by stomach cancer or just want to help out a really, really good organization that helped me out when I was going through the thick of it, I would check out Debbie's Dream Foundation.
Very good. Travis, you got something?
You might cross paths with me at Disneyland later this month. We got 5 panels at WonderCon and a lot of books. I'm easy to find online, although I'm in the process of nuking my Twitter account. I'm deleting the history. I'm one of the 10 most followed psychologists on Twitter, so that's not something you get easily. It's time to kill it. But in terms of the books, I mean, the book I'm best known for is on the psychology of Batman and Psychology, A Dark and Stormy Night. But there have been 15 titles since then. Got to do the math. Anthologies working with people such as Colt has written for a lot of them. And it's the most recent of which, The Handmaid's Tale Psychology, Seeing Off Red, a book that was released on Election Day.
Yeah.
I really hope that would be a stupid choice of a release date so that the book would be completely irrelevant the following day. Instead, it became more relevant. And it's one of those where it's like I ended up feeling weird about promoting the book. I haven't promoted it the way I should when what has happened in the world, as I said back at the beginning of this discussion, makes it even more important to talk about the fiction, particularly something like The Handmaid's Tale.
Right. Yes.
Yeah, I wrote my chapter hoping I was going to be wrong about everything.
So maybe you should have written the opposite. And then we'll make sure there's links in the show notes below for folks to find all the things that you guys are up to. Thanks again, guys, so much. I appreciate your time.
Thank you. Take care.
Thanks for joining me and my new friends on this episode. I will talk to you next time on 1980s Now.